Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Richard M. Daley.
Good morning. Thank you very much, David, for those kind remarks. And to Andrea, I thank you for the review of U.S. economy. She was right on point about all the problems that not only Ontario faces, but United States of America has faced, and she repeated those. When you talk about cities and regions, you talk about the questions they all asked. You have to review many questions. What are your strengths and weaknesses? You have to wonder, are you going to be a global city, a global region? How many people travel from Ontario throughout the world and see what they're doing differently and your competition is? Are you bringing the best and brightest people from around the world to locate in Ontario? Are you looking at the idea of location is everything in life? We know that in business. We know that in government, location. Are you looking at people already who are very creative, like Richard Florida, who I know very well and I work extensively dealing with mega cities? But when you think about Ontario and Toronto, Chicago has much similarity in the Midwest. The same problems you talk about, the United States is talking about the same issue. We used to blame Alabama, then we started blaming Mexico. Now you have to blame somebody, so we blame China. And now we can't blame China because all the businesses are moving back into Mexico. I was just in Southern California. They have a region, Southern California, working with Mexico manufacturing. So it's amazing how you cross borders. But my message is very simply, cities and regions have to lead the way. You cannot wait for all the other issues. Don't wait for the United States. Don't wait for China, Brazil, Russia. Just figure who you are, the city, in the province, in the country, and come together. Those cities and those regions and national governments that work on behalf of their businesses globally, and Canada's looked as a global country more than the United States. It's amazing. Free trade. You understand what free trade is. We never did. But like anything else, you have to come together. You have to collaborate. And I really believe we have much in common. We have differences. Yes, we have differences, but we have to work together. Why do we have to work together? Because if you see the rise of mega cities throughout South America and throughout Africa and Middle East, and now throughout Russia and even throughout China, when you talk about 30, 40 million people, it's larger than 80% of the countries in the world. China has 8, 9, 10 cities of 30, 40 million people. And every day, every week, and every month, there are more and more people moving into those cities. So what do we have to do in regions like Chicago? We're about 10 million people in the region. You take the Midwest. We have to really work together, and that's hard because you have local governments, you have regions, you have provinces, you have national governments. Everybody says to ourselves, we can't do it. But if you take just Ontario and parts of the Midwest, basically we have a larger economic output than Spain or Turkey. It's amazing when you look at it. And we are dependent upon each other. And I've been one who's been very, very pro-Canada as mayor of the city of Chicago. I mean, the economic interest that we have together, the interest that we have as nations and in people are very, very common. We know we have manufacturing. We know we have difficulties in manufacturing. But when you bring technology into manufacturing, it changes it. And people only move if they're moving around for their wages, they'll have to go all the way to Vietnam because China is losing it now. And so it's not just a wage. Many times it's work rules that deal with the cost. I've found that in local governments. But when you think about manufacturing, you think about agricultural. We think about the workforce that we have. You talk about political stability and the language. We talk about well-run businesses, small and large businesses. The region itself, when you think about region, we are in a good position. So as mayor, when I took over mayor in 1989, there's an article by the Chicago Tribune in 1981 described what Chicago was all about in 1981. It said the series was called The City on the Brink. And this is how it began. The city of Chicago has become an economic invalid. The condition may be permanent unless the people responsible for its economic future can reverse the long, steady, seamlessly endless slide. Chicago is losing the industry that was its original reason for existing, has found nothing to replace it. Often cities stricken in this way become irrelevant. Business moves away, young people move away, population ages, the city becomes a backwater. That's not what happened. We basically put together our civic and our political leadership together and said, what can we do together? I am very, very pro-business. Very pro-business. I want more corporations, more businesses to locate and relocate in the city of Chicago. At the same time, understanding fairness in regards to wages and benefits and things like that. But it's important to have a blueprint and a welcoming mat for businesses, because global businesses today can be any place in the world. They don't have to be in Chicago. They do not have to be in Toronto, New York, or Washington, D.C., or Houston. They can move any place. If you look at the large corporation in the United States, all their profits is coming from overseas. It's amazing. Most of their profits coming from overseas, and not just from U.S. or U.S., but basically from overseas. So how do you address this? How do you basically look at the rest of the world? When you think of basically what has happened to urban communities, it took us 100 years to become an urban community. It took how many years for Europe to become an urban community? And basically in China, it's becoming 20, 25 years. It's moving so rapidly, and with technology, it changes. But what we look at, what we look here, both in Ontario and the United States, is our infrastructure. Have we really modernized our infrastructure? Have we looked at water? Have we looked at airports? Have we looked at the environment? Have we looked at roads and bridges? Have we looked at technology? And have we looked at schools? How schools can change dealing with technology as well as manufacturing. And that's what you have to look at. Otherwise, you'll live in the past. And you look at innovative ways to basically finance infrastructure. And that includes the private sector. You have to include the private sector. The United States is going through the same thing. Local government, state governments, provinces, federal government can't raise the money. So what do they have to do? They have to think outside the box. But government has a hard time thinking outside the box. They stay within the laws. They stay within the rules and regulations. They can't see things outside. So many years I came up to Toronto when they sold, basically at least their infrastructure, their big toll road. The same people bid on the Skyway, $2 billion I received from leasing of that. We put in short-term, long-term investments. We took an infrastructure. We looked at other financial transactions of basically leasing assets. Government does not know anything about these assets. They can't manage them well. They're not receiving any revenue benefits. Basically, we brought the private sector in. Much more cost-effective outsourcing in regards to innovation, changes, and better service in regards to government. And though that's what I look at, you have to have innovation. You have changes in government. And we're at a stalemate in Washington. We're at a stalemate in our state governments because they don't want to look outside the box. They want to stay with the same system we had in the last century, and it does not work. But as a mayor, the best infrastructure is education. So what I did is I took responsibility. The first mayor in the United States ever to take responsibility for public schools. Why? If you don't create a good quality of education for young people in our school systems, then you're going to fail as a global city. So I took responsibility. Republicans gave me authority. Democrats couldn't because they were tied into the unions, teachers' union. They took all their money for many, many years. They could not break the bond, allowing the mayor of the city of Chicago to basically take responsibility. When I took responsibility, I didn't blame anybody. Let's all come together and fix the problem. I brought the teachers' union, I brought the business community, and the political community. I put $5.5 billion basically in the whole rebuilding of the schools, our infrastructure. We supported charter schools, military academies. We have over 12,000 young people in military academies, math and science academies, foreign language academies, and many of technology academies. And so what we looked at is basically how you change. You go back to basic math and reading. That was a whole understanding. Creating a learning environment. And this year they're rated out of the top 6 high schools in Illinois, 5 are from the city of Chicago. I've always believed, and my wife did, you have to create a learning environment in the home. in the places of worship, in the community. But you only go to school 6 hours, 7 hours a day. You close the schools down on weekends and vacation and summer. There's not a learning environment unless you have a family. But today you have working families. Today you have many single mothers. So it's very hard to create really a learning environment, and they struggle to do that. So you do after-school programs. You do weekend programs. You do neighborhood libraries, early childhood education. You bring the business community to partner with education. Say, education, you have to open up. You have to realize you have to work with the business community to basically fulfill these jobs. We're the only city in America to start teaching foreign language of Chinese, Arabic, and Russian. We have the largest programs in the United States. Why? I want to give our younger people opportunity to see the world and the opportunities to understand their custom, history, and tradition. Who appreciates that? The Arab community throughout the Middle East, Russian community, and Chinese community. They've been in and out, basically recommending. Now Houston, city of Houston, is going to start teaching Chinese. Why? Because the Panama Canal and the expansion of that. At the same time, I firmly believe the learning environment is the key. If you don't have a good early childhood education, elementary, high school, and college education, you're not creating the creative class that you need to compete in a global economy. If you don't do that, you'll fall farther and farther behind. At the same time, I'm environmentally sustainable. Why? Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes. And to me, that is the idea. One of the best asset that we have in Canada and the United States is basically water. And that will be the oil of this century. People will be looking for water all over the United States and all over the world. And to me, that is, you need to protect it. We have a Chicago Climate Action Plan. I'm a very environmentalist, but I don't blame people. I don't blame business. I don't blame labor and government. Let's all work together. So what we did is we put business, labor, advocacy groups, citizens. Let's come up with a broad climate action plan, both for city and in the private sector, basically meeting those standards. And that's what we did. It came out to evaluate both the city, all governments, and businesses, and help them basically reach their point, be environmentally sustainable. And to me, that is an asset. That is the key of working together. If you don't work together, then you have separation, as we've seen many a times in other cities, regions, and countries. No one is going to found an internet company or any other innovative business who want to live in an environment that's not sustainable. And you see where people move, where younger people want to move. They want to make sure it basically is environmentally safety, and they want to enjoy their life. I believe in partnerships and collaboration. Chicago's always changed. We had the Industrial Revolution. I lived near the stockyards, 3 blocks from the stockyards. They moved out many years ago. Let's not talk about the past. Always talk about the future. We had large manufacturing, that moved. We're in a global society. We don't like it. Canada doesn't like it, but we are in it, and we're not going to change that. And we have to be able to change. If we don't change, it's going to leave us behind. And so I believe in partnership, and also I believe that politicians must act like public servants. I love being a public servant. I was a member of the Illinois Constitutional Convention, state senator, chief prosecutor of Cook County, and mayor of the city of Chicago. I was not a political servant. I didn't represent myself as a Democrat or Republican, a liberal or conservative. I was a public servant. Those who voted for me, I represent. Those who voted for my opponent, I represent. Those who could not vote, I represented. And so that's what you have to get back, a commitment to public service. We are dominated by a political system. In Washington, D.C., we elected a Democratic president. He's not a president, and it's really sad what is happening to Washington and what is happening to politics. And I believe, and I grew up in politics, but you're a public servant. You build coalitions. But now you don't have to build coalitions. You go back to your base. And so what I did over years, I worked with President Bush 1, President Clinton, George W. Bush, and President Obama. I didn't care what party they're from. I got more money from President George W. Bush for basically rebuilding public housing and infrastructure than any other mayor in the country. I didn't care what his political philosophy was. He was president of the United States of America. That's what he was. He's a public servant. I may disagree with him, But I don't have to keep bashing him every day for my own political proudness to get my name in the paper. I said, he's the President of the United States, I'm going to work with him. Now, some people disagree with that, but that was their problem. I never listened to him anyway. But let's get back to being a public servant. Public servants, you pay their salaries. Parties don't pay their salaries. And the faster we stop that, the better off we are, that you become public servants. So what do you do in Ontario? You have to get all the local governments together. If you don't get them together, everybody's going to be fighting. I organized in 1997 the Metropolitan Mayors Conference. We had over 270 mayors. We're mayors from Wisconsin, Indiana. And let's work as a region. What's good for Chicago is good for you. What's good for you, good for the city of Chicago. First decision. Sears is moving out of the city of Chicago. Are they going to go to Ontario, Texas, or outside the city? I said, here, stay outside the city. Because a lot of people get upset with that. They just moved, so what? They're still within the confines of the region. So if you don't work as a region, if everybody's arguing and fighting, then basically the region loses. And the region is not just one state. It has to include a number of states. In 2003, I organized the mayors of Canada and the United States. We had separate organizations dealing with the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Seaway. I said, let's all come together, Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Seaway Initiative. Over 71 mayors worked on it, dealing with the quality of water and the protection, management, dealing with invasive species, other issues. And basically we worked together. We found out we have more in common. We found out the national government should do more to protecting the Great Lakes. And to me, that is a very, very valuable asset. It's more important than oil. Remember that. This is the greatest asset that we have, and to protect it. President Hu Jintao visited the city of Chicago, the only one after he visited Washington, D.C. And the reason why he came to the city of Chicago, the president of China, because what we did is we want to be the strongest ally for China in regards to investments in the city of Chicago, in manufacturing, and anything that we can get from China who wants to invest in Chicago, in the Midwest, or basically in the country. We think that is very, very important to invest more capital into medium-sized business, small business, large business who perceive. When we take it from Europe, we take it from the rest of the world. Why? We cannot take it from China. And that, to me, that is very, very important. And we have a clear view in common dealing what we can do with industrial areas, agricultural areas, the economic potential, putting people back to work and keeping them to work. And to me, the whole idea now we're thinking about China, India, Brazil, Mexico. We're thinking of Africa, the Middle East, and even Russia, which is really important. For many years, we didn't even pay attention to those regions, and now it's part of our carbon footprint in the city of Chicago. We send more delegations. I've had meetings of Arab mayors. I have meetings from mayors from Africa, mayors from all throughout the Americas, all the way down to Argentina, mayors from China. If you don't have global meetings in your city and regions, then how are you going to be global? And the other important thing is you have many, many good business people that I met in Chicago, in New York, who have basically originated from Toronto, originated from Ontario, in different areas, Montreal, Quebec, Vancouver, have maybe settled into New York, Chicago, other places. You have very, very good business leaders that have a huge effect upon the city of Chicago. So we got back to the Chicago Tribune, and you see what it is today. And I always mention the Chicago Tribune went bankrupt, so that's the other issue. I've always, and one time I told them that, they did not like it, but it is something they realize that you can do a report, but you have to have the passion and commitment, the willingness to take a risk. Willingness to take a risk. If you're not willing to take a risk, you stay in the past. And to me, recently, The Economist talked about the downtown area, how it's changed since 1981, 1989, how you brought life back into it, how you brought young people, middle-class families, you rebuilt the education system, the cultural life. Well, you made Chicago a city buzzing with prosperity, sparkling with new buildings, new concept, new sculpture, new parks, vitality and strength, and confidence in the future. And that doesn't mean we don't have problems. We do have problems. But my view is you have to have a vision, You have to have a plan. And you have to be able to take a risk. If you never take a risk, you'll never make the decision. And so my commitment to public life was always vision, planning, debating, and then taking that risk and executing that decision on behalf of the best interests of the city of Chicago. I applaud the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and all the business leaders coming together, because if you don't lead the way, and if you don't lead the way, who's going to lead the way? You can't let it to government. You have to have collaboration between business, you have to have collaboration between government, and here, labor. And if you don't have that collaboration, and then this world is changing so rapidly, you don't want to be left behind, because the farther left behind. And also, don't be too dependent off the United States. Be your own country. Take risk. And don't worry what the United States is going to do. Worry what you're going to do. Thank you very much.
I'm going to moderate the
Okay, sure.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'm Jim Stanford, economist, Canadian Auto Workers, and we are one of the co-sponsors of the summit, and we're now joined by several of the other unions, CEP,
Okay.
CUPE Ontario, the teachers, and building trades. We're very glad to be part of this conversation. I'm going to be moderating the Q&A session that we have about 20 to 25 minutes for, so thank you very much for your intriguing and provocative vision of how a global city can function and be part of a region and a national economy as well. I'm going to abuse my position as moderator and ask you the first question,
Yes.
just to get things flowing. Of course, we're going to make natural comparisons now between Toronto and Chicago, and many residents of Toronto, myself I guess from time to time included, suffer from a well-known psychosocial condition called Chicago envy, in terms of some of the great things you've done with your city. I'm tempted to ask if the mayor of Chicago has a football team or not, but I'm not going to ask that question. Well, another aspect that we're...
well, one thing, Toronto should get over it. Be your own city. I visited Toronto. I love Toronto. I think you have some things that I love to have. And this idea that it's like Chicago looking at New York. Oh my gosh, we're in New York. Get over it.
Well put. Well put.
Just, you have a great city. I love the city. I visit the city. I say you have great communities, you have a great downtown area, you have beautiful lakefront. You have that island that we don't have. You'll correct it what's happening with the high rises. You do a little park in front, maybe 25, 50 yards from one end to the other. It'd be perfect. You'll think you're on Lakeshore Drive. So get over it. Be positive about what you're doing in Ontario and what you're doing in Toronto.
Well put.
So don't get the second image.
Right on. Okay, let's go to the audience. Any questions for the mayor? Questions, comments on what he has done and what the city has? Sir?
If you were the mayor of Toronto... Oh, sorry. If you were the mayor of Toronto and you had squabbles on waterfront as similar to the ones that you overcame, major fights on massive funding of an aging transit system and so on. There are all these things that have been lying around for many years. How do you kick people in the butt and get stuff moving?
Well, I think you really have to organize both the business community, both within the city and outside the city. You have to get the labor community all behind it. Because if you look at the rest of the world, they're not waiting for Toronto, Chicago, and New York. China's spending $600 billion on their infrastructure. $600 billion. They're not waiting whether or not you're going to build this or not. They're just going to go ahead. And what you have to do is you have to have some vision. We're being too protective constantly. People don't want change. They'll accept the past, and they think they're going to live in the past. No one's going to live in the past. And so if you don't get the business and labor together and the political group together and say, we're going to do this, we're going to bite the bullet, this is not just going to help the city, but it's going to help the region. Basically, it's the region that you want to help. And if you don't do that, the longer you delay decisions, the worse off you become. Now, I expanded O'Hare Field with a lot of opposition. I got all my money from a Republican president. I didn't get it from the Democratic president. I got it from a Republican president. We codified our permits. We told the federal government and state government, let's work together, codified everybody. We put many, many people to work even today. All union workers working. And to me, that is the essence of cooperation. That it doesn't help only business, it doesn't help the government, it helps the working people, and that is the issue.
Perhaps just a supplement to that, in Toronto's case, both the waterfront and the transit developments, it's been a challenge to get everybody pulling in the same direction, but also we've been held back by the kind of change in direction that happens with new administrations, new elections, and so on. How do you get a consistent buy-in that allows you to move ahead with those
Well, we have a
projects?
consistent buy-in by business and labor. You have the plan, you have the vision. And so once you have that, you substantiate it, whoever becomes the mayor, whoever becomes the provincial governor, realizes that both liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans are behind this issue. And that's what you have to do. You have to be an outside, basically, power structure over government. If not, then it fails. And to me, you need them to work together. Then you have the vision and plan. Otherwise, you're never going to fulfill anything you want to fulfill as a global city. You'll always be left behind.
Well put. Next question for the mayor. Yes, in the side there.
Given your involvement in the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Great Lakes Initiative, you really briefly alluded to the Panama Canal. What are your observations, opportunities, changes which will be created for trade in the Great Lakes area because of the Panama Canal completion?
Well, I think the problem with the St. Lawrence Seaway is built in 1959, so it can't take global tankers. It can't take any of the global tankers, and we have to figure that out within the Great Lakes. If we don't, then we get the oldest tankers coming in. They have more invasive species, more dealing with. It costs governments, both in Canada, both the United States, more and more money dealing with invasive species. Panama Canal is going to change everything. It's going to change in regards to Houston, Miami, Savannah, Jacksonville, Virginia Beach, all through there rebuilding their ports, besides in Mississippi and New Orleans. Mexico is in there recently. They're building their port south of Tijuana to compete with LA. LA has so many major problems. They want to do 2 rail systems up to Midwest that will affect the Canadian Pacific as well in regards to railing in and out, exporting and importing. And so it is really changing. That would change the course there. It will cut a day off, I think, or more of shipping from in and out of China and the rest of the world. So it's going to be positive for the South. It also going to be positive for the Midwest. How do you basically export your products? In a Global City Initiative, we're studying that. We have 70 programs by the federal government in the United States. 70 different directors, 70 different laws, rules, and regulations. If you're a medium-sized business, you need a lawyer, you need a consultant, you need a lobbyist, cost you $1 million. No one will do that. And so we're asking the President administration to consolidate everything, put it online, give every business the opportunities to find out financially and legally what they're responsible for, what programs apply to them automatically, and how does it benefit them to export. Exporting is the key. In my travels, if it's made in Canada and the United States, quality. You have to understand that. The rest of the world like quality. I've been in and out of China more than anyone else. It's all about quality. They like the stamp made in Canada or the United States because they know it's much more quality. And to me, it will change, but maybe change to the benefit. Houston is the biggest importer and exporter out of Brazil. It's amazing. And so they're becoming more attuned to the world, and we have to tune in the Midwest as well.
Was there a hand at the back, I think? Maybe it was somebody taking a picture. Yes, there it is. Thank you.
How in Chicagoland did you stay away from all the casinos and the gaming that's so prevalent in so many of the larger municipalities?
Well, I was the one who believed that government should own it, and then we should be able to lease it out to a private developer, receive the money for infrastructure, mostly infrastructure and education, nothing else. A lot of people want to put in pensions. I said, no. No, don't put in pensions. Put in infrastructure, and you put it in schools and cultural institutions, things like that. And no one wanted that. They wanted to basically, government wanted to lease it out, get the money, let them flip it, and the private developers make more money. But I really believe government should own it, lease it out, give them a portion of the stock, which they did out here in Canada, parts of it. That's the best way. And everybody thinks it's a moneymaker. I guess all depends what you use it for. It has to be used for education and infrastructure. And so it was very complicated, and we kind of stayed away from it.
We will, later in the agenda today, we'll hear from Matthew Mendelson, who will be talking about the Great Lakes region and the economic potential of the Great Lakes region, as you referenced in your speech.
Right,
as well.
the Great Lakes region. I said we have to come as a region. When you take agriculture, and you take manufacturing, you take water, you take energy, and you take natural resources, you think of this. I mean, Russia has that. No other part of the world has that. China doesn't have it. India doesn't have it. Africa doesn't have it. South America. But we have it. And so when we think of regions, and I said you have to be independent of the United States, but also you should understand you can stand on your own 2 feet. And don't worry about elections in the United States. We don't worry about elections here. So why should you be worried about what's happening in the United States? And so my theory is I believe in much more regions. To compete with 30, 40, 50 million people in the city, that's pretty tough for Chicago. It's very tough for us to compete with a city with 30, 40 million people, such as Sao Paulo or Mexico City. And so sometimes that doesn't mean you have differences. You're going to have differences, but you can work collaboratively as long as it helps its people.
Question in the front here.
I can probably hear me from the front.
Here you go. Here's the mic.
What changed while you were mayor of Chicago in the relationship between the city and its universities and colleges?
Well, my father was mayor for 21 years, and he said higher education is one of the most important aspects of the city infrastructure. Higher university, public and private, basically museums and hospitals. Things will change in communities, but those three are institutions. So for years, he fought for University of Illinois, one of the best campuses now, right outside the city of Chicago. It's the largest campus now, growing. And I've always believed that that's the essence of global initiatives, is when you have good higher education. We have both public and private universities. And we have great hospitals and cultural institutions. You put them all together, then you see the world completely different. And so that was always a backbone because of basically my father's belief. I lecture at University of Chicago. I do a lot of work at University of Illinois. I'm a product of DePaul University. So I'm very involved with universities. And historically, we allow them, I gave them more tax increment financing money, TIF money, money to expand both cultural institutions, higher ed, and hospitals. And sometimes into communities. But it was the best thing for Chicago's future. You have to have the vision. You can't look at the past and think the past is going to stay there. You have to look at the future.
Thanks, Mr. Daley, for inspirational words on city. I'm just wondering, how did the people of Chicago go from sort of critical and living in a dangerous city and not nearly as proud to be Chicago citizens to sort of, what do you think really kind of enabled that change and brought that about? Because I think in Toronto, I think we sort of struggle from that a little bit.
Well, again, I'm one who, I worked every Saturday. Most public officials don't work Saturdays. I worked every Saturday for one reason. People work during the week. When they can see their public officials? Saturdays. So I worked every Saturday in my public career. I went block clubs, community organizations, different groups, parades, everything, to feel that they know who you are. They're not going to agree with you 100%. They're going to disagree with you. But at least they know who you are and what passion and the interest you have for the city. It wasn't a Democratic interest or Republican interest. It was what is good for the city. And so you have to build that feeling that they're part of the solution. They're dealing with their parks, dealing with their schools, dealing with their library, dealing with their community. They have to become involved. And so if they're not, then they're detached. And it becomes a government that's detached, and local government should never be detached from its people. It should be part of it. And that includes the region as well.
I think we have time for one more question before we move on, there in the middle.
Mayor Daley, I enjoyed your presentation, and it covered a lot of ground. I'm Mitzi Hunter. I'm the CEO of Civic Action. And my question is the role of catalytic events such as the Pan American Games, which will be coming to the region in 2015. Yeah. And what importance do you think these events have on establishing a region's brand globally? And I would also like you to touch on the income divide and disparity, and how do you create that shift by including opportunities for minorities in contracts and procurements and things like that?
Right. One thing, dealing with the Pan American Game, 1959, they were supposed to go to Cleveland. Cleveland withdrew it. My father's mayor, Eisenhower was president. They called him. My father said, we'll do it within, they had to do it in 3 months, and they did it. And they carried on the Pan American Games. America, you know America's better than us. You do business with Cuba. The United States can't. And in the last presidential debate, there wasn't one question about south or north of the border. It's amazing. Now think of that. It wasn't one question about Canada or one question about Mexico, Central America, or South America. We have avoided that in American politics. We bash China, we bash Russia, we're bashing Brazil. We are not looking at America as a group dealing with consumers, dealing with business, dealing with quality of life, everything going on that we can do. And that's a mistake that we're making. Canada's not made that mistake. You have good relationships, you know, throughout Americas. We don't have that. America does not. We look more to the east, more to Europe, and now we're confronting what's happening in Asia. But I believe that America has so much potential, but for the United States and for Canada, it is amazing. There's a lot of potential there, and so that we should take advantage of it for another generation of young people who want jobs. We talk about Chicago is very diverse. We're very proud of our diversity. So when Harold Washington was the first elected African-American mayor, he talked about diversity of the workforce and economic opportunities. So I made that a law that we allow minorities and women-owned business economic opportunities in public contracts. And we prevailed many times. We gave money to the private sector because that's the window of opportunities. If they've been shut out for 50, 100 years, you have to give them opportunities, and you have to be able to work with them, be able to do it. And the diversity of workforce. We're struggling. America and Canada, we're the only ones that really had a middle class when you think about it. Germany did too. That took many, many years for them, England, the rest of it to get there. But Germany has kept on their industrial revolution, their manufacturing, for one reason. They have apprenticeship programs. They basically have apprenticeship programs. We did away with them. I don't know what Canada, but we are the best vocational schools in Chicago. Educators said did away with them. Federal government said did away with them because it's discrimination. You're putting young people in there that should be able to all go on to college. So the last 20, 30 years, brought everybody on to college. We did away with vocational training. It's very difficult to get tool and die makers in America. We have to bring them in from Czechoslovakia. We have to bring them all in. All immigrants will do that. We can't do that anymore. And that's the problem with education. The doctrine of dirty nails does not apply to America anymore. They don't want to get their nails dirty anymore. And so that's one of the problems you have with the workforce. Now we have to realign the workforce and say there's great opportunities there. Great opportunities. You're not just going to work on the workforce itself, but you're going to be able to be promoted within that company. Great opportunities, but that's going to take a long time for the United States. But I believe manufacturing will come back with technology. We see it already. We see it with Chinese investments. I'm very pro Chinese investments. In the last election, the mayor of Toledo, Ohio, criticized Obama and Romney for bashing China. He said if it wasn't for Chinese investments on their lakefront, in their downtown industrial area, there's no money from the federal government and no money from the private sector in the United States. Again, mayors get what's happening in the global. It's harder for states. It's harder. Now state governors, every state governor is now traveling all over the world for investments coming into the United States. And so from my viewpoint, that's what you have to do. But in disparity, it requires a good quality education and a willingness to help the minority community at all times.
Well put, Mayor. I think we all understand how you got elected for 22 years as the mayor. And thank you very much for what you've done.
Thank you.